My autistic son is sensitive to loud noise, so I asked my neighbor to move her Saturday pool parties. She refused. I'm not changing my lifestyle for your situation. I went home shaking out of anger. Last week she knocked on my door crying as she learned. Look, I get it, okay? Kids have issues. But I'm not changing my lifestyle for your situation. She said it while examining her fingernails, leaning against her porch railing like we were discussing something as trivial as the weather. Saturday is my day. My friends come over. We have drinks by the pool. That's just how it is. I stood on her front step, the late afternoon sun beating down on my neck. I'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times. Kept it reasonable. Asked if she might consider moving the parties to Sunday instead, or maybe starting them later in the afternoon when Marcus would be at his weekly therapy session. Didn't demand. Didn't threaten. Just asked. The music isn't even that loud, she continued. Your kid needs to learn to deal with the real world eventually, right? You can't bubble wrap him forever. My hands started to shake. Not visibly, I don't think, but I could feel the tremor working its way up from my palms. His name is Marcus, I said. He's 9 years old. And he doesn't need to learn to deal with bass-heavy music rattling his bedroom windows for 6 hours every Saturday. I'm asking for a small accommodation. She smiled. The kind of smile people use when they've already decided you're being unreasonable and they're just waiting for you to realize it. And I'm telling you no. It's my property. It's not illegal. And honestly? She tilted her head slightly. Maybe you should have thought about the neighborhood before buying next to a house with a pool. I turned around and walked back across the grass to my own yard. Didn't say another word. My jaw was clenched so tight I could feel it in my temples. This wasn't the first time we'd had this conversation, not really. The parties had started about 8 months earlier, shortly after Vanessa Keller moved into the house next door. The previous owners had been a retired couple who kept to themselves and used the pool maybe twice a summer. Vanessa was different. 34, recently divorced, worked in pharmaceutical sales and apparently decided her new single life required weekly gatherings that started around noon and didn't wind down until well past dark. The first few weekends, I let it go. New neighbor finding her footing, I figured. Everyone celebrates a fresh start. But it didn't stop. Every Saturday, cars lining the curb by 11 in the morning. Music starting shortly after. The bass turned up loud enough that you could feel it in your chest from inside my living room. Marcus didn't do well with unexpected loud noise. That was the clinical way to put it. The reality was harder. He'd cover his ears and rock back and forth on his bed, tears streaming down his face, sometimes for hours. He couldn't regulate it. Couldn't push through it. His nervous system just didn't work that way. Saturdays became crisis management days. I'd take him out of the house before the party started if I could, drive him to the library or a quieter park across town. But some weeks I couldn't. Some weeks I had deadlines or he was sick or the car was in the shop. Those weeks, I'd find him curled into himself in his closet, hands pressed so hard against his ears that he'd leave marks. I tried earplugs. Noise-canceling headphones. White noise machines. We insulated his room with extra soundproofing panels. Nothing was enough when the subwoofer kicked on. The vibrations came through the walls, through the floor. So I'd gone to talk to her. Explained Marcus's diagnosis. Explained what sensory overload meant. Explained that I wasn't asking her to stop having parties entirely, just to maybe shift them to a different day or time when we could work around it. And she told me no. Told me it wasn't her problem. I walked into my house and closed the door behind me. Stood in the entryway for a minute with my eyes closed, trying to slow my breathing. Through the wall, I could hear Marcus's audiobook playing in his room. He'd been calm all morning. The party wasn't scheduled to start for another 2 hours. 2 hours. I went to my office, sat down at my computer, and pulled up the file I'd been avoiding for months. When I bought this house 4 years ago, it wasn't just the house I was buying. The previous owner, Gerald, had also owned the strip of land that ran between the two properties. A narrow access corridor, maybe 12 feet wide, that extended from the street all the way back to the edge of the wooded conservation area behind both homes. Gerald used it for his gardening equipment, had a small shed back there. When he sold me the house, that parcel came with it. Separate deed. I'd almost forgotten about it. Almost. Vanessa's pool sat right up against that corridor. Her back gate opened directly onto it. Her guests parked along it when her driveway filled up. Her pool equipment, the pump, the heater, the filtration system, sat on a concrete pad that extended about 4 feet over the property line onto my land. I'd noticed it when she first moved in. Thought about saying something. But she'd seemed friendly enough at the time, and I wasn't looking for conflict. I figured we'd get along, and if we got along, who cared about a few feet of concrete? Now I cared. I picked up the phone and called my attorney. Left a message asking him to call me back Monday morning. Then I pulled up the county assessor's website and started downloading property surveys. Monday came. I told Marcus I'd pick him up from school early, and I did. Dropped him off at my mother's house with his tablet and his weighted blanket and his favorite snacks. Told her I had some errands to run and I'd be back in a few hours. First stop was a surveying company. Walked in, asked how much it would cost to have my property lines officially marked. They quoted me a price. I paid it on the spot and scheduled them for Wednesday. Second stop was the municipal building. Asked to speak with someone in code enforcement. Sat in a hard plastic chair for 40 minutes until a tired-looking man named Dennis waved me into his cubicle. I explained the situation. Pool equipment on my property without my permission. Vehicles being parked on my land without an easement. I asked what my options were. Dennis pulled up the records. Looked at the surveys. Nodded slowly. If that's your land, and you can document that her equipment is sitting on it without authorization, she's in violation. You'd be within your rights to demand removal. And if her guests are parking on my property? You can tow them. As long as the land is clearly marked as private, you can have unauthorized vehicles removed at the owner's expense. I thanked Dennis and left. Wednesday morning, the survey crew showed up at 7 a.m. 3 guys with tripods and measuring equipment. They worked for about 4 hours, hammering in stakes, painting small markers, documenting everything. When they were done, the crew chief walked me through the results. That concrete pad? About 3.5 feet of it is on your parcel. Same with the fence post at the corner there. And this whole access strip, he gestured at the gravel path where Vanessa's guests park their cars every Saturday, that's you, all the way back. I had him print the official survey and give me 3 copies. Signed, dated, sealed. Thursday, I met with my attorney, Martin Chen. I'd used him for the house closing years ago, and once more when I disputed a medical bill for Marcus. Good guy, methodical. He looked over the survey, looked over the deeds, looked over the photos I'd taken of the pool equipment and the parked cars. You want to send a cease and desist? I want to send a removal demand. She has 30 days to get her equipment off my land. And I want no parking signs installed by this weekend. If anyone parks there Saturday, I want them towed. Martin wrote it all down without comment. I can have the letter drafted and sent certified mail by tomorrow. Do it. Friday afternoon, the signs went up. 2 of them, bright red on white, clearly stating private property, no parking, violators will be towed at owner's expense. I also hired a local towing company to be on standby Saturday. Gave them my number and told them to expect calls between noon and 8 p.m. Saturday morning, I made Marcus pancakes. His favorite kind, with blueberries arranged into a smiley face. He ate them slowly, carefully, the way he always did. When he finished, I told him we were going to have a quiet day at home. What about the noise? He asked. He didn't look at me when he said it. Just stared at the empty plate. There might be some noise, I said. But I don't think it's going to be as bad today. Around 11:30, the first cars started arriving at Vanessa's house. I watched from my living room window. A silver SUV pulled up, started to turn onto the access strip like always, then stopped. The driver got out, looked at the sign, got back in, and parked on the street instead. 2 more cars did the same thing. The 4th one didn't. A black BMW rolled right past the sign and parked in its usual spot on my property. I gave it 5 minutes, then called the towing company. The flatbed showed up in under 15. The driver didn't knock on any doors, didn't ask any questions. Just hooked up the BMW and hauled it away. I watched the whole thing from my window. 20 minutes later, Vanessa came storming across my lawn and pounded on my front door. I opened it. What the hell is wrong with you? Her face was red. Her voice pitched high enough that I could see Marcus peek out from his bedroom door down the hall. I held up a hand toward him, signaling him to go back inside. He did. Can I help you? I kept my voice level. You had Derek's car towed. That's a brand new BMW. Do you have any idea how much that's going to cost him to get out of impound? He parked on my property. There were signs posted. He chose to ignore them. That's always been overflow parking. Everyone parks there. And everyone's been parking on my land without permission. That's over now. She stared at me like I'd started speaking a different language. You can't do this. I can. And I did. I'd also recommend you check your mail. You should have received a certified letter yesterday. What letter? The one explaining that you have 30 days to remove your pool equipment from my property. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. My pool equipment is on my property. About 3.5 feet of the concrete pad it sits on is on mine. I have the survey to prove it. You can relocate it, or I can have it removed. Your choice. This is insane. This is harassment. This is property law. And I'm exercising my rights under it. She stood there for another 10 seconds, fists clenched at her sides. Then she turned and walked back to her house. The party continued, but it was muted. Fewer cars. The music was lower than usual, probably because she was too distracted to care about the volume. I spent the afternoon playing board games with Marcus in the living room. He didn't rock. Didn't cry. Didn't hide in his closet. That night, after Marcus went to bed, I sat on the back porch with a beer and listened to the quiet. The party had wound down early, barely past 8. Normally it would go until 10 or 11. The following Monday, I got a call from Martin. She hired a lawyer. They're claiming adverse possession on the access strip, saying she's been using it openly for the past year and a half, and that gives her prescriptive rights. I laughed. A year and a half? Doesn't adverse possession require continuous use for at least 10 years in this state? 7. But yes. A year and a half doesn't come close. I'm filing a response today. Also, she's claiming the pool equipment was installed by the previous owner, so she has no responsibility for it. The previous owner never had a pool. She installed that equipment herself 6 months after she moved in. I have photos from the real estate listing showing bare ground where the pad is now. Martin made a small satisfied sound. Send me those photos. I did. The following Saturday, 2 more cars got towed. The third Saturday, no one tried to park on the access strip at all. The parties were still happening, but smaller now. Fewer people. Less volume. Whether that was intentional or just a side effect of the reduced guest list, I didn't know. Didn't care. Marcus started having better Saturdays. Not perfect, the noise still bothered him some, but manageable. He could stay in his room with his headphones on and actually relax. He started looking forward to weekends again instead of dreading them. A month after the initial letter, Vanessa still hadn't moved her pool equipment. I called Martin. She's stalling. Her attorney keeps asking for extensions. No more extensions. File for a removal order. Martin filed. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, I did something else. Something I'd been considering for a while. The access strip wasn't just an empty corridor. It had utilities running under it, a water line and an electrical conduit that served both properties. When Gerald sold me the land, the utility easements transferred with it, which meant I controlled access to those utilities. Vanessa's pool heater ran on an electrical line that crossed my property. Legally, she needed my permission to maintain that connection. She didn't have it. She'd never asked. I consulted with Martin. He consulted with a real estate specialist. The specialist confirmed what I suspected. I couldn't cut her power unilaterally, but I could refuse to grant an easement renewal, and I could certainly refuse to allow any new work or upgrades that required access to my land. So when her pool heater broke down in early October, some kind of mechanical failure, nothing to do with me, and her contractor called to ask for access to the utility line, I said no. What do you mean, no? The contractor sounded confused. I just need to run a new wire. 15 minutes of work. You need to cross my property to do that work. I'm not granting access. Long pause. The homeowner said she has an easement. She doesn't. Feel free to verify that with the county recorder's office. The contractor called back 2 hours later. You're right. There's no recorded easement. She told me you were just being difficult, but, yeah. I can't do the work without access to that conduit. That's correct. She's gonna be upset. That's her problem. Vanessa's pool sat unused for the rest of October. The water turned green. Leaves piled up on the surface. I watched it happen from my kitchen window with something that might have been satisfaction, though I tried not to dwell on it too much. The court date arrived in early November. Martin and I showed up at 9 a.m. Vanessa was there with her attorney, a young guy who looked like he was maybe 2 years out of law school. The hearing took less than an hour. The judge looked at the surveys, looked at the photos, looked at the timeline. Asked Vanessa's attorney if his client had any evidence of a written agreement allowing the equipment to be placed on the neighboring property. He didn't. I'm ordering the equipment removed within 14 days, the judge said. The property owner has been more than patient. If the equipment is not removed by the deadline, the plaintiff is authorized to have it removed at the defendant's expense. Vanessa's face went pale. Her attorney started to object, but the judge cut him off. This isn't complicated, counselor. Your client put her property on someone else's land without permission. Now she needs to move it. That's all. We walked out of the courthouse into weak November sunshine. Martin shook my hand. That went well. What happens if she doesn't move it? You hire a contractor to move it for her and send her the bill. If she doesn't pay, you file a lien on her property. I nodded. The equipment was removed 12 days later. I watched from my window as a crew spent most of a Saturday afternoon dismantling the concrete pad, relocating the pump and heater to the other side of Vanessa's yard, rerouting the connections. They had to dig up part of her lawn to do it. The new setup looked cramped and awkward, squeezed into a space that clearly wasn't designed for it. Not my problem. The following week, I had a fence installed along the property line. 6 feet tall, cedar, with a locked gate at the front. No more access to the strip from Vanessa's side. No more pretending it was shared space. The party stopped after that. Whether it was because the pool was out of commission, or because the reduced parking made hosting impractical, or because she just didn't have the energy anymore, I didn't know. Didn't ask. Saturdays became quiet. Marcus started sleeping in past 9 on weekend mornings, something he'd never been able to do before. Winter came. Snow covered the fence, the strip, the yard. Marcus and I built a snowman in the backyard and he laughed when it fell over. Real laughter, not the anxious kind he used to manage social situations. Just pure kid joy. I thought the whole thing was over, done, finished. Then spring arrived, and so did the for sale sign. It appeared in Vanessa's front yard in mid-April. I noticed it on a Tuesday morning while taking the trash out. Professional sign, full color photo of the house, agent's name and number. She was selling. I didn't think much of it at first. People move. Houses change hands. Maybe she decided the neighborhood wasn't for her anymore. But then I started noticing the showings. A lot of them. Multiple cars every weekend, sometimes during the week too. And I noticed something else. The potential buyers kept looking at the fence, kept walking down to the access strip and frowning, kept pointing and talking to their agents. A few weeks later, I ran into one of the showing agents at the mailbox. Friendly woman, mid-40s, professional smile. Beautiful fence, she said, nodding toward the cedar barrier. Did you put that in recently? Last fall. Ah. She glanced back at Vanessa's house. That explains some things. What do you mean? She hesitated, then shrugged. Off the record? The listing mentions overflow parking and easy access to the back conservatory area. A lot of buyers are expecting that access to be included. When they see the fence and realize the strip is separate property, they lose interest pretty fast. That's not my problem. No, I suppose it isn't. She smiled again, more tightly this time, and walked back to her car. Vanessa's house sat on the market for 3 months. Then 4. The price dropped twice. I watched it happen through occasional checks on the listing website. Original asking price, $475,000. First reduction, $450. Second, $425. By August, it still hadn't sold. Then, last week, she knocked on my door. I'd been in the kitchen making dinner. Marcus was at the table doing homework, his pencil scratching steadily across the paper. When the knock came, he looked up with mild alarm. Unexpected sounds still startled him, even now, but then went back to his work. I opened the door. Vanessa stood on my porch. She'd lost weight. Her face looked drawn, older somehow, though it had only been about a year since the whole thing started. And she was crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears tracking down her cheeks. Can we talk? Her voice was hoarse. I didn't invite her in. Didn't step outside either. Just stood in the doorway and waited. I can't sell my house, she said it like a confession. I've had it on the market for 5 months. Every buyer backs out when they realize the access strip isn't included. My agent says I've got to drop the price another $50,000, minimum, just to get serious offers. That's almost $100,000 below what I paid for it. I said nothing. And I can't afford to stay. The mortgage is killing me. The pool equipment relocation cost me $14,000. The legal fees were another $8,000. I'm drowning. Still nothing from me. She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. I wanted to ask if we could work something out. Maybe you could sell me an easement for the strip? Or at least sign something saying future owners would have access? I'll pay for it. Whatever's reasonable. No. She blinked. No? Just like that? Just like that. But this is my whole financial future. I put everything I had into this house. If I have to sell it at this price, I'll be underwater for years. I might have to declare bankruptcy. That sounds difficult. She stared at me, fresh tears welling up. Please. I'm begging you. I know I wasn't. I know I wasn't always considerate. About your son. About the noise. But I didn't know. You knew, I said. I told you. I came to your door and explained exactly what was happening to my son every Saturday while you blasted music for 8 hours. I asked for a small accommodation. You told me you weren't going to change your lifestyle for my situation. I was wrong. Yes. You were. So let me make it right, please. Whatever you want. I'll apologize. I'll write a letter. What I want, I said slowly, is for you to leave my property. And then I want you to finalize the sale of your house and move somewhere else. Ideally somewhere far away. You can't do this. You can't just ruin my life over some grudge. I'm not ruining your life. I'm exercising my property rights. The same property rights you dismissed as irrelevant when I asked you to respect my son's needs. You made a choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. This isn't fair. Fair? I felt something tighten in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. Fair would have been you saying sure, I can move my parties to Sunday, no problem. Fair would have been you acknowledging that a 9-year-old's mental health matters more than your weekend entertainment. You didn't do fair. You did not my problem. So now this is not my problem. She stood there for another long moment, tears still falling, hands shaking slightly at her sides. I thought she might say something else. Might make another argument, another appeal. Instead, she turned and walked away. I closed the door. Marcus was still at the kitchen table when I came back. He'd finished his homework and was drawing something on a piece of scrap paper. A house with a big yard and a tall fence and a smiling sun in the corner. Who was that? He asked without looking up. Nobody important. He nodded, accepting that, and went back to his drawing. 2 weeks later, I saw a moving truck in Vanessa's driveway. I didn't go outside. Didn't watch. Didn't care to know where she was going or what came next for her. The house sold the following month. Lower price, I assumed, though I didn't check. The new owners were a couple in their 60s with no apparent interest in pool parties. They introduced themselves one afternoon, friendly and brief, and I never heard a peep from them after that. Summer came again. Marcus turned 10. We had his birthday party in the backyard, just a few kids from his social skills group and a cake shaped like a dinosaur. He sat in the grass with his friends, actual friends, kids he'd chosen and who'd chosen him back, and smiled for almost 2 hours straight. No loud music. No rattling bass. No overwhelming sensory assault. Just a quiet Saturday in a quiet neighborhood, exactly as it should have been all along. I never thought about Vanessa again. Some problems solve themselves once you stop tolerating them. Some people only understand consequences when consequences arrive. And some boundaries, once established, don't need to be explained or defended or negotiated. They just exist. And either you respect them, or you learn what happens when you don't.